You know ID in the town all day. ID in the SEA. You know ID in the town all day. ID in the SEA.
Hello and welcome to episode 441 of the fabulous Peltoncast, sponsored by our friends at Pagliacci Pizza. I'm your co-host, Kevin Pelton.
And I'm Tristan Carcino.
And we're coming to you in separate locations this week. I'm in Seattle, Washington, home of the four-time WNBA champion Storm.
And I'm coming to you from Renton, Washington, home of the, I think, maybe still powerless.
No, they got it back this morning.
The now powered Super Bowl 48 champion Seattle Seahawks. We are back. I do not ever remember recording a full Peltoncast on a Friday afternoon. This is a first.
Well, it's not really a full Peltoncast. It's sort of a semi-Peltoncast because
it's not an emergency pod.
In addition to the Seahawks being without power much of this week, so were you.
I was without power. I was competing my hardest. I'm mad at everybody for being glib about treating the windstorm. They were like, oh, it's national news. Well, I am over here in the dark. You do not understand the value of power until you do not have power. You in particular, ESPN senior writer Kevin Pelton. We've heard all week about this famous flicker that you had at your house. Meanwhile, I have not seen the darkness. I was born into the darkness this week. Last night, everybody was asleep. Power is completely out. The neighborhood, the power is completely out. I don't think I have ever been in a darker experience in my entire life. I'm sitting there. I'm reading my Batman comic books, of course, because I'm an adult. And I turn it off to go to sleep. The fire's gone out. I turn off the flashlight. And I was like, I literally cannot see anything at all. It was, I think, the darkest moment of my entire life.
Wow. There you go.
And then power came back. It was amazing. But with that, I have to give to you top 5 Seattle windstorms from my recollection that I remember because of these sporting events that preceded them.
Okay, great. I mean, I know what number 1 is.
Well, no, number one is this week. That's taking the top spot. At number 5, correct me if I'm wrong on any of these. Okay. At number 5, this one honestly wasn't that big of one. I just couldn't think of a 5th one, and lists have to go to 5. They cannot be a top 4. But if you have a better one, please remind me. These are windstorms.
Because the man wouldn't give you 10.
Because the man wouldn't give me 10. At number 5, Oregon State versus UW, November 4th, 2022, in a windy game that UW inexplicably passed 52 times in. You were at this game. I was not. My power went out in like the second quarter. I avoided it because Mrs. Fantasy Genius wasn't going to be there. And I was like, I can't leave these children with a grandparent or whatever when I know the power is going to go out. Goes out in the second quarter. I think I was able to stream on my phone. UW wins because of, I want to say, a Peyton Henry field goal to win the game.
Correct. Yeah. I had forgotten a little bit about this game, and Christian Capel ranked the most memorable of the 20 wins during UW's 20-game home winning streak. And this was way high up there, in part because one of the things that happened was the lights went out at Husky Stadium during this game.
Oh, the lights went out at the stadium. I guess I kind of remember that.
And now, nowadays, if the lights go out at Husky Stadium, it's just, and I hate to trigger you with this particular word, it's just a flicker. But back then, you had to wait like 20 minutes for them to power back on all the way. And so there was an extended delay.
Do you panic
game.
Every time you see the lights flicker when they turn them down? You're like, oh my God, it might be as serious as the flicker that I experienced.
25 minutes, according to Christian Capel's recap. But yes, Peyton Henry, 22-yard field goal to cap a 92-yard drive with 8 seconds left to win this one.
More notable than I didn't really remember the part about the lights going out.
Yeah.
Number 4, UW versus Cal, September 17th, 2019. Of course, the Why Are We Still Here game, mostly about the lightning storm, but it was super windy as well. We stuck around to see a different Garber brother get a win in Seattle, 20-19 on a last-second field goal against Jacob Eason's UW Huskies.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm a little dubious on including this one as far as the win, but okay. Number 3.
There was definitely wind.
I'm not saying there was some wind. There's always some wind.
It was more about the lightning, but I think it was more notable than the Oregon State game. That's maybe before I remember.
Yeah, it was 2 a.m. when the game finished. Yeah.
At number 3, January 5th, 2019, Seahawks versus Cowboys playoff game. A massive storm hit late that night after the
Huh.
game was over. I remember hearing, this was my first year living in Fairwood. I remember hearing the loudest thud I had ever heard. I was woken up by a thud from the wind because I'm not sure if it was that predicted, this windstorm, or maybe I just wasn't paying attention. But our power was out. I remember driving around the neighborhood, and it was one of those moments where the power was out all day the next day, but also phone service was out, internet was out, everything was down the entire day. So we drove down to South Center, I remember, but looking around and seeing all the trees in people's yards, it actually felt pretty similar to this week. Our power was out until about 11 p.m. the next day. And notable because I missed seeing the Cody Parkey double doink game to lose the wild card round for the Bears. Apparently, you know a storm is serious when it has a name. Apparently, that storm is known as the Epiphany or Epiphany Eve windstorm with gusts up to 60 miles per hour.
You really needed to be around a holiday. This windstorm was not really tied to a specific holiday, so it's more difficult to name it, I would say.
Number 2, because again, I'm putting this most recent week as number 1. I've never had the power be out for multiple days. December 14th, 2006, apparently known as the Hanukkah Eve
Correct.
windstorm.
This name I know. There's two named storms I know.
Well, I didn't want to include the Inauguration Day storm because I honestly don't remember that.
Me neither.
A.
No, I don't.
B, not attached to a sporting event, as far as I recall.
I mean, probably there was one, but no, I don't remember it either.
The Niners beat the Seahawks in what I think was the last year before I had season tickets. We were pummeled in Boulevard Park. I know we watched the game at what was then Katie's house.
No,
and we went to...
You are inaccurate about this memory.
No, what was it?
We watched it at the Sulkald's house. There was a huge group of us watched this game.
Oh, and then we went back to what was then Katie's house.
Correct.
After?
Yes.
Okay. So we watched it at Big John Nizzle's house before the windstorm really hit, because the windstorm hit after the game.
Probably, yeah. I mean, if we were willing to go out, yes, I'm sure it did.
If I recall correctly, Frank Gore ran all over the 29 carries for 144 yards.
Yeah.
And he was kind of a Seahawk killer, Frank Gore. So that happened. Power was out most of the next day. We thought it would last until after. I remember driving to Burien.
Was our power was out?
Yes.
Okay, interesting. Because my memory of is the next day going to the Sonics offices because I was working there at the time.
You might not have been. Me and Kayleen and Katie were driving around Burien, just like we were in end times mode. Kayleen bought a loaf of Wonder Bread. Never once has eaten Wonder Bread, but she was like, "We need to stock up." And the Fred Meyer was open, but none of the refrigerated items were for sale. And I think it might have been cash only. And it was 2006, so we may have still had cash.
Yes. But I remember at lunch going to maybe somewhere near the U District and trying to eat lunch, and places were all shut because of the fact that they didn't have power. And if I recall very correctly, and this is getting far too granular, I believe there was a Storm in the Sound event with Betty Lennox that night at a UW women's basketball game.
Wow, there we go. And at number 1, I've got the bomb cyclone. My power being out for 3 days. It was like 70 straight hours without power. We're also referring to it as the Nick Bosa retire bitch game. The Seahawks defeat the 49ers on Sunday. Shortly thereafter, a massive windstorm in the city of Seattle, crushing the 49ers' health to Brock Purdy and Nick Bosa after.
We're drawing some dubious connections here, I would say, for a storm.
The rest are all specifically tied to a sporting event, so
you had to tie it.
I have to tie this one to a sporting event also.
It's the Dalton Connect game where Dalton connects career high 37 points. 8 3-pointers, 9 3-pointers to tie the all-time NBA rookie record, was briefly interrupted by the flicker in my keyboard.
Not known to me as the Dalton Connect game because I saw none of it because I was in the literal darkness.
I thought for sure my power was going out. I was very thankful that my power did not go out, and even more thankful after the ordeal that you've been to. So I don't know if there's anyone else still out there without power, but hopefully you get it back soon, and hopefully you were able to make it through this week. But we're only going to hit, because it's Friday afternoon, a little later than the typical Peltoncast. We're only going to hit the time-sensitive topics. So we are not going to cover cookies this week, even though we have 2 cookies to discuss. We're not going to cover UW at least men's basketball. I might touch on women's basketball really quickly from a preview standpoint, but only the stuff that by the time we next record will not be relevant. So we do have to mention a quick round of toasts. Congrats to UW women's soccer, which advanced 3-1 in penalties after a scoreless draw at Utah State in the opening round of the NCAA tournament. The Huskies traveled to Starkville to take on Mississippi State in a game that is going on ESPN Plus as we record this. So
Wow.
we'll discuss the results of that later. And then congrats to UW men's soccer, which beat crosstown rival Seattle U Thursday night in the opening round of the NCAA tournament on penalties. A scoreless draw. They won 3-0 on penalties after beating the then number 11 Redhawks 2-1 during the regular season in their ninth consecutive NCAA tournament appearance. Huskies now headed to Dallas to take on number 12 seed SMU on Sunday at 4 p.m. on ESPN Plus.
Okay.
So there you go. We'll talk about Austin Shenton next week. We can save that one. We'll talk about Jordan Eberle's injury next week. But the Seattle Sounders.
Wait,
FC,
we're not doing the other toasts?
no, the other toast we're gonna save as well.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Jeez.
We're getting through this.
All right. You're getting through it.
Well, oops all roundup. After 20 days after their last game, Sounders are finally taking the field again on Saturday night, facing LAFC in the Western Conference semifinals. The last time they played was 2 days before the election.
Oh my God.
How long ago does that feel? So the good
It
news,
honestly doesn't feel like that long ago. It feels like both an eternity and also like yesterday.
right? Jordan Morris, Albert Roshnak back healthy as far as we know. Paul Rothrock was the biggest injury question, it seems like, coming out of that break. He had a muscle injury but was expected to return to training on uh, on Wednesday. I have not updated this today because of the fact that this was kind of a last minute decision to record. But it seems like he's in good shape. I think the Sounders should be close to full health for this one. So LAFC, they earned the number 1 seed via tiebreaker with the rival Galaxy. Had a plus 20 goal differential, which is good, but only slightly better than the Sounders plus 17 mark. No longer the dominant offense of years past. They finished 5th in goals and 3rd in XG during the regular season. Their attack is built heavily all around Denis Bouanga and Mateusz Bogusz, who combined for 35 goals and 15 assists. Bouanga tying Leo Messi for second in MLS goals during the regular season, but nobody else in the roster had more than 6 goals. They did bring back former MVP Carlos Vela in September. He made his debut in the opening round series against the Vancouver Whitecaps, which they won 2-1, but played just 4 minutes total in that series. So we'll see if he factors into this one at all after a few weeks off. But of course, the caveat to this is they've looked extremely dangerous against the Sounders all season, notching 9 goals in their 4 head-to-head wins across all competitions, while allowing the Sounders to score just 1. So I I think people are probably being a little too fatalistic about this. It's still a single game elimination matchup. The fact that LAFC is the better team and has matched up well with the Sounders, like on a given night, anything can happen, as it did most notably during the 2019 Western Conference Finals when LAFC probably had the greatest team in MLS history. I think, I mean, we can say maybe this Inter Miami team was more talented, but in terms of results, I think that LAFC 2019 team was the best. And yet the Sounders went in there and upset them and hosted MLS Cup and won it, which if they do manage to get to MLS Cup, there's a very good chance they'll host it again. So there you go. Sounders finally going to play.
I waited 3 days for this update. No. Cool.
A lot to add.
I waited 3 days to get to Oops All Roundup.
Are we going to do percentage chance of victory?
You tell me. Is it a 1 game?
Yeah. 1 and done. Penalties after extra time, if
38%
necessary.
a chance. 38% chance of victory.
I'm going to say 33%. Like, there's definitely a real chance of the Sounders winning this one.
That's tomorrow night, you said?
Saturday night. Yes.
What time?
7:30 p.m.
All right. I will tune in. It'll be the first Sounders match that I watch on television this year.
Our UW women's basketball, we're only going to gloss over, I think, the fact that they lost at Montana on Sunday to end their perfect start to the season. Their first, I don't remember if they had a non-conference loss last year. It might be their first in a long time, as they shot just 2 of 14 from 3 and allowed Montana to shoot 57%. Then beat a pair of sub 300 teams this weekend at home, Cal State, or this week at home, Cal State Fullerton and Prairie View A&M. But Monday, shit gets very real against LSU at the Pink Flamingo Championship in the Bahamas.
Okay.
That game's at 10:30 a.m. on Monday, with the winner to take on the winner of the matchup between 2024 Final Four team NC State and Southern University. That'll be on Wednesday, the second game of this tournament. The Tigers are 6-0, have yet to face a top 100 team per BartTorvik.com. They lost WNBA star Angel Reese and Haley Van Lith, who transferred to TCU, but still have three stars in wings Flau'jae Johnson and Michaela Williams, and post Anissa Morrow. Johnson came into Wednesday leading the country in scoring by shooting 67% on twos, 42% on threes. And I just ran my warp calculations, and Flau'jae Johnson is number 2 in the country in wins above replacement player without adjusting for schedule. Anissa Morrow is number 3. So LSU has 2 of the top 3. They've played more games than some of the other top teams, but still, this is still a very
I ran
scary
my warp
opponent.
projections. They were similar.
Did you?
This is one of few podcasts that can say that. Does UW women have any chance of winning this game?
A lot lower than the Sounders have. I mean, I suppose there's a scenario where it could happen, but Kim Mulkey's still walking the other sidelines. LSU still has incredible talent, and UW, is a reminder, lost at Montana.
Yeah, so no. What you mean to say is no, they don't.
No, I don't. I would be very surprised if they won this one.
Okay.
There you go. UW men playing Alcorn State later Friday night, so we'll report back to you on that one.
No full preview of that one.
I don't. I mean, you very likely the game will have been played by the time you're listening to this, unless you get to it right away. UW football reached, I guess we could have toasted to this, reached bowl eligibility with their 31-19 win Friday versus UCLA. I suppose I'll read you the toast from this one, which is that Devon Williams Jr. was Big Ten Freshman of the Week, and Russell Davis II shared Defensive Player of the Week honors in the Big Ten after forcing a fumble and recording 3 sacks.
Not bad. Are we able to talk about this game?
Yeah.
I think this game against, obviously, bowl eligibility, the main piece, getting the victory, huge for the Huskies in this. When you look at it, no matter what happens against Oregon, who I think I mentioned this on Sunday, have clinched the Big Ten, or at least a spot in the Big Ten championship game.
Correct.
It's funny, people being like, this game is being played for nothing. It is definitely not being played for nothing. That game, there's a lot at stake. There's a lot at stake for UW. I think Oregon is almost certainly a lock to make the playoffs, but 2 consecutive losses would hurt them pretty significantly. I think if there's a world that they could fall out, I think it would be very difficult. So Oregon still needs.
We're not previewing the Oregon game. That we're doing.
I understand, but so the bowl eligibility, the season overall that Jedd Fisch has had, given the turnover, to become bowl eligible is a massive achievement. And this team, both having that happened and this team underachieving this season, are good portents overall. I don't know if statistically they ended up that much better than their record, but they still did underachieve in general this season. The big thing that happened in this game, obviously, was the transition from Will Rogers to Devon Williams, and really Will Rogers demanding that transition to be made. It was a situation that the previous week against Penn State, you could isolate it like it's Penn State. It's a difficult environment. Devon Williams definitely outplayed Will Rogers in the second half. Will Rogers was more experienced. He probably earned the spot to start the game against UCLA. Throughout the UCLA game, it became pretty evident that Will Rogers was not capable of being a starting Big Ten quarterback. And this was not an amazing UCLA defense, but some of the mistakes that Will Rogers made during that game were pretty shocking, given the season that we'd seen him have before this.
And the fact that he's a 6-year senior, like the whole point of Will Rogers' experience, presumably, is to avoid mistakes like the one he was making.
And that's even having been bailed out. QBR doesn't affect this. There was an interception on a play that was roughing the passer. Is that what the penalty was?
Yep.
On the roughing the passer. And I don't think the roughing the passer necessarily caused the interception. It was just bad decision making from Will Rogers. So this is a game that could have looked a lot worse overall than it did from Will Rogers. Basically, I think we have seen the last of Will Rogers as a UW Husky quarterback. He will be an interesting footnote in history when we look back at the season, similar to when we talk about the Jacob Eason season, different quarterbacks that have played. I don't think Will Rogers didn't do anything wrong as quarterback for the UW Huskies. Will Rogers came in here, had a great attitude, had a pretty good season, helped the Huskies win a lot of games that they needed to win, made some great passes along the way. And this is Damon Williams' team now. So this is Damon Williams' team, at least for these next 2 games. And hopefully beyond then, we have no idea what the future will hold. It is college football. Everything can change overnight. But how Damon Williams played in the second half of this game, when you look at the stat line, I think a lot of the receiving yards came from, I think, 132-yard reception to Denzel Boston, but just 1 incompletion, 7 of 8 for 67 yards. Yep. And the scrambling ability, being boxed up and then being able to escape those plays, it is just something that is not in Will Rogers' game. And that's when you have an offensive line like this line, you kind of have to have the ability to get out of some plays every once in a while. Damon Williams was able to take negative plays and turn them into positives, or take negative plays and at least turn them into neutrals. And that was an issue that Will Rogers had all year long. We'll see about the passing and how he gets to. I don't think Damon Williams is the next Lamar Jackson necessarily, but right now I think we can feel pretty good as the passing kind of continues to develop in Damon Williams, probably giving UW the best chance to go into Oregon and win, and to win in their bowl game.
Yeah, I was already prepared and had been advocating for Damon Williams Jr. to start this Oregon game before what happened against UCLA. And my logic was that Will Rogers has been very effective in favorable situations when he's got time to throw and, he doesn't have to move around in the pocket. Those sorts of situations, those set up Will Rogers for success. And even in those situations, Will Rogers wasn't successful against UCLA. And that's when I think tipped it over to Damon Williams Jr. needs to be in the game right now. And, what you were saying in the stands at the time is like, basically there's going to be trouble with the fans if Damon Williams Jr. doesn't come out at quarterback when he did. I mean, even
we're not going to start throwing stuff on the field. This is
people are going to be unhappy.
Yeah.
There will be unrest. People, I think, were ready for Damon Williams Jr. to come in the drive before he did, when Will Rogers threw yet his second interception of the game. And then after that, it was untenable to continue playing him at quarterback, I think. And, Jedd Fisch has said that he will not name a starting quarterback ahead of the Oregon game, but it would be pretty shocking if it wasn't.
None of the
Damon
parties
Williams.
Involved are stupid. Oregon knows who's starting that game. UW knows who's starting that game.
But the Russell Davis piece is interesting too. I did not go back and look what was the last big performance by Russell Davis in Seattle.
There we go. Top 5 Russell Davis performances.
Oh man, see, you were more prepared than I was. But a huge game for him in, his first really extended playing time. Someone who came with Jedd Fisch from Arizona, had played a fair bit there and was injured much of this season. And the UW pass rush, I think, is one thing that has not been what you would have hoped it was going to be coming into the season, in part because Zach Durfee has missed so much time due to injury. And, he played, unfortunately, only sparingly in this UCLA game. But you saw just how transformative it was defensively for them to put that kind of pressure on. This is Ethan Garbers is the younger one. Chase is the one that played at Cal. And I thought it was a very impressive defensive performance by UW in this one.
So, okay. The thing that this season reminds me of, I think overall, and the way you kind of have to point to, 2010 UW season. This was the last time that they played a game on a Friday night. Is that right?
No, that Oregon game that we just talked about was in fact on a Friday night. Or the Oregon State game, I should say.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Never mind. This is the last time they played UCLA on a Friday night. But
actually, that was on a Thursday night. So no, neither of those.
To become bowl eligible, UW had to rattle off in the 2010 season. They had to rattle off 3 wins in a row, and all winnable games. I remember we were talking about it at the time. They literally just lost at number 1 Oregon, 53-16. Hopefully, things look a little bit different in a couple of weeks, but had to rattle off 3 wins in a row to become bowl eligible, which for that UW team was huge at the time, in a different way than it is for this UW team. Obviously, they're not coming off a national championship appearance. They were 2 years removed from not winning a game.
I mean,
So,
at that point, when the Huskies went to a bowl game in 2010, it was the first time since 2002.
oh my God.
It was not that long ago.
So they beat UCLA. They go at Cal to win. They go at Wazoo to win the Apple Cup. Boom, they're bowl eligible, and then beat Nebraska. And I think this is kind of what you could pinpoint as the start of the UW run that we are more or less still currently on. All of these different dominoes led to them playing in the national championship game. If they don't get bowl eligible in 2010, the chances of Chris Peterson, Steve Sarkisian getting hired, Chris Peterson being hired, all the way the dominoes to Kalen DeBoer, to Jed Fish, probably don't happen. Like, these are important games that happen that you can pinpoint back to.
I consider me very dubious of this argument, especially
I'm
because
telling
they were the same caliber of team the next 2 years. It wasn't until
this,
2013 that they really emerged as a contender level
but
team.
all of those things, the recruiting that they were able to do, the extra practices that they were able to have, all of these things matter, right?
Sure.
And it kind of put Steve Sarkisian on the map as a coach who could take a team from no wins to bowl eligibility in 2 seasons. You could look at the win versus USC, that his first year. Also, there are a lot of different points along the way, but this was big. And so becoming bowl eligible, again, the extra practices, even that time for Damon Williams to like, if Damon Williams in a couple of seasons is one of the best quarterbacks across college football, we can look back to this moment against UCLA and him coming in that second half and winning the game, personally winning the game along with the UW defense and getting the Huskies bowl eligible. So I think this could be, in the moment, it is a big game. I think this could be a huge game long term.
I mean, I hope we look back on that way. That would be great. So I'm a little more skeptical because I think I've been thinking about it in terms of like people talking about, maybe as we transition over to the next topic here, like the Seahawks win and them turning the corner. It's like, no, actually, things don't really turn the corner that much. Just there's kind of random blips up and down, and then we, after the fact, assign turning the corner, because after the fact it seems a lot more kind of the path seems a lot clearer than it did at the time.
I think the one last thought that I have on this game against UCLA was, this is not a bad UCLA team
No,
that UW beat. They were, I mean, this team that crushed Iowa a couple weeks ago, but the score, they won by 9 or 12, but they were up by significantly more before, more or less, a kind of garbage time touchdown.
well, they were only
UCLA,
up by 6 more, but yes.
So to have a game where deep into the fourth quarter they were up 31-13, to have a comfortable victory is something that really hasn't happened against even average teams that much this season. And to have domination and the way that the defense played overall, the takeaways that they had, just seeing Russell Davis come up with that ball and how happy he was about it. It was like, there's an energy going on right here. And I think Jed Fish is, they avoided a lot of the mental mistakes. Will Rogers made some mental mistakes, but as a team, they didn't have the mental mistakes that haunted them earlier in the season. And I think the team is kind of rounding into shape. There's a little bit less of the undisciplined conversation around this UW football team. So I think, all things considered, no matter what happens in Eugene next week, no matter what happens in the bowl game, I mean, obviously we'd like them to win the bowl game, but no matter what happens in those two things, I think this has been a very solid season overall.
I'm going to remind you of the Peltoncast golden rule, but let's keep expectations appropriate heading into Oregon. We should also shout out Jonah Coleman. It's a big part of the winning formula. 21 carries, 95 yards, 2 touchdowns. Went over 1,000 yards for the season. Jonah Coleman continues to excel. All right, let's wrap up.
Cam Davis hurt? Cam Davis was out there. He just didn't get a carry. Yeah, he had a reception, one reception for 18
Yeah, he
yards.
did, yeah.
Kind of interesting how they figured out the backfield a little bit. And that piece of just Damon running, whether it's design, scrambling, I'm just like, get the extra blocker when you have the quarterback run. It is, I mean, seeing what Taysom Hill did, right, this last week, like, there's just, it is such a dangerous thing to have.
Oh,
and
you know who really saw what Taysom Hill did last week?
Were you playing against him in fantasy?
Oh, I wasn't playing against him in fantasy.
Oh, you were playing him.
Oh, I wasn't playing him in fantasy. He was on my bench in fantasy. And
Oh,
Jimmer, I don't think you were following this. When you still had power, but Jimmer won his matchup against me in the Peltoncast Champions League because Brandon Aubrey first missed a 40-yard field goal that would have given me the lead. Then Brandon Aubrey makes a 64-yard field goal There's a personal foul against, I can't even remember the Cowboys were playing at this point. I'm so infuriated. It doesn't even matter. Uh, was it Washington? I don't know. They take the personal foul, take the field goal off the board, end up going for a 4th and 2 later on that drive and failing to convert. And Brandon Aubrey never sees the field again.
Oh, I saw. Yeah.
So congrats to Jimmer. Big time. Congrats to Jimmer. All right, let's talk about the Seahawks and preview their matchup this Sunday against the Arizona Cardinals. First, I guess we haven't referenced specifically. If you haven't listened to the emergency pod recorded in the wake of the Seahawks comeback win in San Francisco, please check that out. Consider that part of this week's abbreviated podcast. Seahawks playoff odds per DVOA still only at 16% last in the NFC West. So I think people were really kind of riding high off that victory. There's still a lot of work to be done, but there's opportunity now ahead of the Seahawks, including with 2 matchups in the next 3 weeks against the NFC West leading Arizona Cardinals, who come to town on Sunday as the Seahawks try to snap a 4-game home losing streak. Many people are asking, Tristan, are you the curse?
It's so funny to hear that. I've been at all these games. Every big win in Seahawks history, basically, I was there.
I mean, the other thing is it's funny because the Huskies are currently going through the opposite. We were technically at the Washington State game that they lost this season, but they win all the home games we're at and lose all their road games.
I'm just saying, 2 out of 3 NFC champions. They played NFC. They lost the NFC championship in the 80s, right?
The Seahawks, yes.
Yes.
And well, not an NFC championship, but
wait. So yeah, two out of the 3 NFC championships that the Seahawks have won, I was there. So just remember that. I am not the problem. The problem might be everybody else in the building. But what I will say is coming out of that game, I think this is what the Seahawks fan base needed. I'm on TikTok or whatever, and I'm just seeing so much Seahawks content all of a sudden. It is people were to be activated in this. And it's kind of, I think it might be a factor on Sunday. The home stadium, it's the Cardinals. It's not a travel team in the same way, but it's a fan base that was wanting a moment like this in the way that we were when we did the post-game pod. I think it's pretty huge that the way that they beating the Niners and the way that they beat the Niners and then heading to a game against Arizona that for the division as of right now is a huge game.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be surprising if it didn't remain a huge game. So the Cardinals are good now. They've won 4 in a row, 5 of their last 6 since a 1-3 start. Their only loss in that span was at Green Bay. They blew out the Bears and the Jets by a combined 60-15 margin heading into their bye week last weekend, and are 2-0 so far against the NFC West, having beaten both the Rams and the 49ers. Cardinals are 12th in DVOA. They are 10th in offense, 12th in defense, 14th in special teams. They were 32nd on defense a year ago. Much better than that on offense. And this is easily the best offense of the Kyler Murray era. I don't feel like I've watched almost any of the Cardinals. Have you seen them much?
I mean, I saw a bit of this. I think this was on Red Zone, but the Jets game. And it was kind of like, I think the Jets are just truly awful. I'm trying to think of any other Cardinals games that I watched, but in that game, it was like, oh, they're just completely inept on both sides of the ball. The Jets. I didn't take that much for the Cardinals from it.
All right, key question. Can you name the offensive coordinator of the Arizona Cardinals?
The offensive coordinator? Is it somebody notable?
No. That's why I'm asking.
Then, I mean, no. I mean, I don't know if there's that many random offensive coordinators. I know their coach, but the offensive coordinator?
I think most offensive coordinators in the NFL, or at least if it's
I was gonna say
the 49ers offensive coordinator. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, I couldn't name the Rams or the Niners offensive coordinators, but
that's a little different. Drew Petzing is the Cardinals OC. We'll see if he gets any love from this. Kyler is completing a career-high 69% of his passes, second best yards per completion ever, also the second lowest sack rate of his career, and back to being a big-time run threat 2 years after his ACL tear. He ranks 10th in EPOA plus CPOE composite and 3rd in QBR, which, as we know, puts greater weight than they probably should on rushing value for QBs.
Drew Petzing really is a guy. Right.
Well, this is
looking him up. I did a weird deep dive because there was some very questionable uh field goal decisions this last weekend that were pretty shocking. I think we talked about this in the hang the banner, right? The extended the game banner. And I was like, it's defensive coaches who do that. And I was looking at record of offensive coaches or background offensive coaches, defensive coaches, and really you kind of just can't. It is all
Hey,
over the place.
this is what I've told you. This is what the research shows. I mean, obviously Buffalo with Sean McDermott. Uh, it turns out that maybe having a really good quarterback is more important than whether your coach is offensive or defensive.
There are a handful of really like Mike Tomlin is such a massive outlier when you look on like a larger scale or whatever, but there are a lot of really great offensive coaches, but then there are also a lot of really great defensive coaches. So it's there's almost nothing to be learned from it.
Oh, we're gonna have the Mike Tomlin discussion when we go back to those over-unders, sir.
I mean, I freaking told you guys, like there's some things that are true in the world,
I
but
didn't make it a log at least.
Drew Petzing.
Marvin Harrison Jr. has been solid in his rookie season. The fact that he's averaging 15.1 yards per reception offsets a relatively low 55% catch rate. So overall, 8.3 yards per target, very good. Not quite as good as their leading receiver, tight end Trey McBride, who's at 8.5 yards per reception. Trey McBride is like this is a division that has seen some good tight ends over the years, and he is definitely one of them.
Definitely the most annoying player to watch when you're watching it because he is always open. And I would say Trey McBride falls under sneaky athletic.
Yeah, I think that's fair. James Conner has been surprisingly dangerous as a receiver. He's averaging a career high 10.3 yards per reception. He was around sixth the last two seasons. So that's a pretty massive difference. Be interesting to see how the Seahawks handle that out of the backfield. Conner has also been solid as a rusher. They're ninth as a team in rushing EPA. The defensive DVOA for the Cardinals is intriguing. They're 25th in opponent EPA per play and 26th in rushing EPA per play allowed, but they're 12th in DVOA. Part of this is they faced five of the six top offenses by DVOA: Detroit, Green Bay, Buffalo, San Francisco, and Washington, and then probably have been unlucky on third downs where opponents are converting 48% of the time, second highest in the NFL. But even if you look at first and second down, they're only 22nd in EPA per play. So I'm not quite sure what DVOA is seeing besides the schedule here to push them all the way up to 12th. It's interesting because it's a lot of the same group as last year. They have added some depth, and then cornerback Sean Murphy Bunting has taken over as their number one corner. But because he missed some time, they only have one newcomer, linebacker Mac Wilson, who's playing more than 70% of their snaps thus far. Going through it statistically, it seems like one of the big differences is that second-year corners Starling Thomas V and Garrett Williams have really stepped up in the nickel, and then opposite Murphy Bunting. So they've been pretty solid there, even though again they've still allowed a decent EPA per play. And
Yeah, I wonder if there's. Or sorry, go ahead.
They're 31st out of 32 teams in pass rush win rate, but average in sack rate by committee, they have no one with more than 3.5 sacks, and they're also forcing turnovers at a league average rate.
I guess I'm not super sure if some of these things are replicable, what the Cardinals are doing, but I wonder if DVOA is really liking some of the just dominating games that they've had overall, right?
Without question, but EPA should like that too, I guess is what I would say.
I mean, the 41-10, like these are games that probably shouldn't have been this lopsided. Curious what they are against the spread overall, but like the 41-10 victory against the Rams, that was a loss, 42-14 to the Commanders. Close win against the Dolphins, crushed the Bears, absolutely demolished the Jets. And I would guess that the Jets, like their EPA was probably bad and DVOA was bad in that one.
The Cardinals outgained the Jets by 199 yards in that one.
A very difficult team to understand overall because you look at some of these losses. I mean, the 42-14 loss to the Commanders is the one that stands out because otherwise the losses aren't particularly bad. Like losing to the Packers on the road they lost pretty badly, but it was not a terrible loss. Losing at the Bills on the road is an inexplicable loss. I guess I'm not sure if I'm convinced that this Cardinals team is actually this good. If the Cardinals are, well, I guess they're only 6-4, right?
Yeah.
It's not like their record's amazing, but I don't even know if I'm convinced that DVOA isn't overrating them just a little bit. But they do have those dominating wins recently, and that's the kind of thing that DVOA likes. And as of more recently, they've been playing better. I just see this as a game that it feels like more of a barometer check for the Seahawks than it does the Cardinals. And I think this is the kind of game that we'll get a sense of who the actual contenders in the NFC West are going to be. If this game is a close, hard fought game, but the Seahawks win, then I think it's going to be Seahawks Cardinals, and that game on the road in Arizona is going to be such a massive one. If the Seahawks come out and win this game comfortably, I think we could feel like, okay, maybe the Seahawks have kind of put some things together overall. And it's also about the defense. They play 3 in a row against the NFC West, against some of the better offenses in the league. And 2 consecutive weeks, Mike McDonald's defense has done very well against the Rams in a game that they should have won before the bye, and then really controlled the Niners in the end. In a game that, obviously the Niners have given the Seahawks fits for a long time. If they could do that again against Arizona here and end up with a victory, I think you have to look at it and say, Mike McDonald, whatever he's done with the linebackers, taking time with the scheme, figuring it out a little bit. I think you have to kind of say it like, okay, Mike McDonald might have figured out this defense, gotten the people into the places that he wants to get them to, and we might be looking at a Seahawks team that could be making an actual push to the playoffs.
Yeah,
if the Cardinals beat the Seahawks, the playoffs are pretty difficult at that point, at least the division. But there's a lot of competition for even the 7th wild card in the NFC. So to me, it kind of feels like it's not division or bust, but the Seahawks more or less probably need to win the division to make the playoffs.
It's a clearer path, and I think at the very least you have to split these next 2 games against Cardinals. If you don't get at least one of those two, the paths get very difficult. I mean, Ernest Jones, I think, has made clearly a massive difference. Here was a stat from Robert Mays. In their past 2 games, the Seahawks have created 10 unblocked QB pressures, 3 more than any team in the league during those 2 weeks. His analysis, they've upped the creativity and layers to their pressure packer since trading for Ernest Jones, and it's giving opponents problems. And those haven't necessarily turned into sacks, but obviously you want sacks, but there can be unblocked pressures can be wins even if they're not a sack. And I think the ultimate example of that was the last offensive play for the 49ers before their final drive, when they're trying to run out the clock, when Devin Witherspoon comes unblocked, gets cut on that play, but still manages to break up the pass, basically.
I watched a long video about this, about how I'm sure other people saw this, but basically Kyle Shanahan doesn't let Brock Purdy change the protections of the line and sets up different outlets based upon that. But that exact play is, do you remember the Trent McDuffie play in the Super Bowl? Basically, Niners need a first down and they probably win the Super Bowl. Trent McDuffie at the time, not Devin Witherspoon, comes in unblocked, breaks up the play, and the Niners go up and lose the Super Bowl because of it. And seeing how many times that happened, like, you can look at the plays and the coverage looks identical in it. And you look at that and you're like, Mike McDonald's doing his work here. Like, and I think, defensive coaches throughout the league are starting to understand a little bit what the Niners are doing. Kyle Shanahan's a good enough coach that'll figure it out. But seeing those things happen, it was one of those things where it's like, I'll be honest, I don't think Pete Carroll's doing that shit. Like, I don't think the Pete Carroll defense is, even with the various defensive coordinators that he had along the way, that is not how he is designed as a coach, is to find those little moments and to take advantage of them and see, okay, they've done this many times. Here's how I'm going to play it. And when seeing that the Seahawks did that against Brock Purdy and against the Niners in that moment, it was pretty exciting. I mean, they'd already won the game, but it was an exciting thing to see that they'd done all of this work to understand the situation that they were in, to know precisely what the Niners were going to do in it, and to get the drop off. Because the pass that they had that we talked about, the tackle that Kobe Bryant made, that was designed. Brock Purdy basically has to make that outlet. Kobe Bryant has to make the tackle, and he did. But it was a pretty exciting thing to see.
We should also mention, I don't know if we did in the postgame pod, Tyrese Knight in the start in place of Tyrell Dodson after the Seahawks waived him during the week was outstanding as well. So if the Seahawks continue getting really good play from both of those linebacker spots, I think that's very exciting. A fascinating thing I hadn't realized. So I did these notes originally on Wednesday in the hopes that your power might come back on less than 24 hours after it went out, or about 24 hours. The Seahawks at that point were 1.5 point favorites. The Cardinals now are 1 point favorites.
Really?
It has flipped all the way.
Do you think the power being out at the facility changed things? Like, legitimately, do you think that mattered to bettors?
I might have. It probably shouldn't. I think it's more that the underlying statistics suggest this is about how it should go. I mean, like, I'm looking at FPI on our page has Cardinals 55% to 45%. So it may have been a case of kind of wrong team favored, and then the smart money was always going to come in on Arizona later in the week.
Yeah, I guess the advanced statistics favor Arizona more than the win-loss record does.
Right.
It's really hard to tell. I mean, I guess it's kind of about how much do you really think that the Cardinals have put it together in these last 4 weeks. I mean, they're 4 impressive victories in a row, right? But if you think that the Cardinals have put it together, like all 4 of them are good wins, some by a lot. But going at Miami, I just feel like some of them are games that, and the stats aren't going to see this, they probably should have lost this Dolphins game. It was a little shocking victory, and I think Kyler's playing really well. I'm curious to see how Mike McDonald handles that. James Conner ran 20 times for 53 yards. The Dolphins kind of ran all over them. That was a kind of an attrition game that the Cardinals just worked their way back in. I think the Seahawks offense is probably being a little bit underrated statistically. They've only had Abe Lucas back for one week. They looked pretty good with Abe Lucas back.
And Nick Bosa out.
And Nick Bosa out, sure. But the Cardinals do not have a Nick Bosa. There are only 3 players probably in the league, maybe 4, who are at the same level as a pass rusher as Nick Bosa. It's not the type of thing where we can just be like, oh, well, if every team doesn't have their Nick Bosa, because not every team has a Nick Bosa.
Right. But the Cardinals have been, by some measures, an effective defense without one.
I'm a little skeptical about that. In fact, the more that we talk about this, I think Kyler's going to be hard to contain. I think the Seahawks defense is, what they did against Brock Purdy. He ended up running the ball in a couple of key situations and getting them. And that's what happens when they're dropping so many players, right? They did a pretty good job with some of the fits, though. And I think there's a play that Boye Mafe filled up one side really well. And it was the person who I'd never heard of who just took a horrible angle, right?
I'm not sure who you're
I can't remember what his name was. He took a bad angle, and Brock Purdy did the pump fake and got an easy first down on like a 3rd long. Kyler Murray's going to be able to do stuff like that. Brock Purdy's
Job?
No, it wasn't Job. It was a different
person.
Yes, yeah. That type of play. Kyler Murray's going to be able to do stuff like that against the Seahawks. It's going to have to be a different game plan. And I think it's going to test Mike McDonald what he does a little bit more. But the way that Ernest Jones has been playing, I feel pretty good about it. I think the offense, though, is the thing that is going to be different. We've had 2 consecutive weeks of Jackson Smith and Jigba as the guy, right? And Jackson Smith and Jigba and DK Metcalf together. Tyler Lockett in that 3rd role. That is very nice to see. We'll see if Noah Fant plays with Abe Lucas there. Ryan Grubb's able to open up things up a little bit more. And Gino running, too. I think I feel good about the Seahawks offense against the Cardinals. I think the Cardinals defense is being a little bit overrated. And maybe it'll be a high-scoring game. Maybe it'll be back in what year was it? 2016, I want to say. Carson Palmer versus Russell Wilson. A freaking showdown between those 2 quarterbacks in Seattle.
The Sunday night game that the Seahawks lost?
Yeah, maybe it'll be kind of like that one.
Might have done.
Where it's a dogfight between these 2 teams. I think it could be a really good one, but a loss, just looking at it record-wise, would make things pretty. This is kind of a must-win for the Seahawks in a lot of ways, because the division is the path, and a win against the Cardinals is, having these 2 consecutive wins in the NFC West. That really opens it up. So I think it is a better than 50% chance of victory here.
I think it's a 50% chance of victory. I think this very much could go either way. So
you're going 50-50?
Yeah.
I'm like at a 56.
Wow. What an intense disagreement. A classic intense Peltoncast disagreement.
Maybe I'm being a cockeyed optimist right now, but I think the Seahawks have figured something out a little bit right now.
I hope that, I mean, I don't know that I think that they figured something out, but I hope that they have, in fact.
Defensively, don't you feel like they have? I mean, it's been 2 consecutive weeks of, where are they at DVOA-wise?
That's a good question. I paid more attention to where the Cardinals were DVOA-wise than our ongoing question of who will finish better. Will the Seahawks finish better DVOA-wise on offense or defense? Which, an entire nation is watching with bated breath to find out the answer to that question. Seahawks currently 15th in offensive DVOA, 14th in defensive DVOA. So it is really quite a battle.
Yeah,
no, it's down a little.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
The defense was,
I think, must be a product of opponent adjustments. Because
when you lose to Daniel Jones, you just get dropped like a handful of spots.
Exactly, yes. As soon as
it's never been more deserved. That is just ugh. That
All
was
right.
the olden days. They figured it out.
It was the old days for Daniel Jones.
Uh,
Should the Seahawks sign Daniel Jones? I don't think he's coming.
no. Anyway,
No, it's
I'm
actually a
fascinated to see
really
if-
good play for comp pick purposes.
Do you get a comp pick if you sign somebody mid-season?
Sure.
Okay.
That's not relevant to it. All right. Well, we will be back next week with a full episode. Again, we have cookie talk. We'll go into greater depth on the Mariners offseason, many topics we haven't covered here, and we'll have the results. We are nearing halftime in Starkville, where UW women's soccer remains tied with Mississippi State 0-0 thus far. So we'll have a final outcome from that. You'll probably already know it by the time we'll
Emergency
discuss
pod.
it. I think we've done enough of those for 1 week. We've got our fill. On that note,
Thanks for listening.
thanks.
You're leaving this awkward silence in, right? No.
Yes, of course.
No.